Hey, it is the week before Christmas. Feels a little different this year, doesn't it? Yeah. We went to the mall in Bellevue yesterday, and we realized we were idiots because we showed up and there's no parking, and Janine says, "We just came to the mall on a Saturday the week before Christmas. It's going to be insane." And overall, it actually was. But it's a different Christmas, and Christmas means that we're getting near the end of the year, and that means 2021, and there's a lot of hopes on 2021. There's a lot of expectations that 2021 will be different. We want to enter into 2021 intentionally. And so what we want to do and what we want to do together as a family is I want to invite you into a process altogether of 21 days of prayer and fasting. And we're going to be starting the first Monday in January. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be asking you to consider joining in on this with us by giving up something. And that could be maybe a meal a day for 21 days. Maybe it's social media for some of us. Maybe you're really crazy and you're like, I'm going to go without caffeine for 21 days. Just let us know if that's you. Give us a heads up. We'll avoid you for 21 days until those withdrawal symptoms are gone. And whatever that is, though, we're asking you to consider for 21 days, the first full 3 weeks of January, to set something aside to enter into this fast with us, but not just to fast, but also to pray. And Janine, as the director of prayer, has taken some time to put together a prayer prompt for every day of those 21 days. And we'll let you know what those are. We have some bookmarks that we'll hand you that Sunday before that have a theme and has prayer prompts for every single day. But what we're asking you to do is to abstain from something for 21 days and to enter into prayer for 21 days. This is for our own healing, for the healing of our town, our city, our church, but also for breakthrough. You're going to find that as we pray and as we fast, that oftentimes it's in fasting God brings breakthrough. It's when we deny ourselves that God recognizes us and he moves. Now, this doesn't manipulate God. It doesn't do anything like that. But what it does do is it puts our hearts, puts our attitude and our spirit in a position to actually receive what he has. And I can't think of a better way for us to enter into 2021 than with prayer and fasting and preparation for change. Yeah? All right. So let's do that. We'll be talking about it more next week as well. As we get ready for it. But again, we'll give you everything you need to know, and we're just asking that you prayerfully consider over the next couple weeks about how you might participate in that. Janine and I personally are going to do what I personally consider my own little version of purgatory, and that's no meat or sugar for 21 days. And if we've talked for any extended period of time, I tend to lean more toward carnivore and junk food. Like, those are my two food groups. I don't have a whole lot of other food groups. So that's what we're entering into. And so you can join us in that. But we're excited for a new year. Again, there's a lot of hopes and dreams set into 2021 because the reality is 2020, for most of us, not so great of a year, right? Now, personally, Janine and I and our family have had kind of a good 2020, actually. Like, we got to adopt our youngest daughter. That was at the beginning of the year. We got some clarity on direction and decided to step away from a situation that just wasn't right for us. We got to rest, we got to refocus and hear the voice of God, align with obedience to his calling in our life. And then we got to go out on an adventure and move here with all of you wonderful people. Yay, yes. It's been a pretty good year for us, but the reality is, I know that's not true for most people. And even though it's been a good year for us, we recognize something, that this season of really honestly our whole world, but specifically our culture and our society, our politics, everything seems dark. And we feel that. It seems like we're in the midst of a very present darkness, one that is marked in a number of different ways. And I know that's true not just for us as a whole, but probably for a lot of us individually as well. That this year has been really, really difficult. And it could be from COVID-related things where we're locked down and we don't have access to the same things that we've done in the past, or we don't get to celebrate in the ways we want to celebrate. We don't get to be with the people that we want to be in. And then we're hit by other things as well. I can't remember at least a time in my short lifetime where we as a society have been more divided than we are today. We have never been more socially divided. We've never been more politically divided, ideologically divided. I mean, it's gotten to the point where it's so bad that you can't just be neutral on issues. You have to choose a side, and it better be my side. Otherwise, you're my enemy. And I feel that. I think we feel that. We feel the reality of the darkness that this kind of division has put us in. And really, those divisions are not just about expressing personal opinion. There are completely predetermined sides, and you better fall within one of those sides, and it better be the right side. And if it's not the right side, I will personally put you at the other end of a tirade that has never sounded more religiously zealous to get you to realize you don't believe the same thing as I do politically. In fact, it's created an entire new religion in the U.S. A religion of ideals and political ideals and social ideals. And God save you if you're at the other end of one of those tirades. My guess is you have been at some point in time this year. I have been at some point in time this year, I promise you. And it's not fun. We are in a dark time. And it certainly goes well beyond this last year. I mean, arguably it could go on for the last couple years, but I can't remember a time personally in my own life when things have been this dark, and it's taking its toll. Statistically, it's taking its toll. In fact, we have just a couple statistics we're going to put up on the screen that talk about mental health. So we have 19%, even before COVID-19, of adults experiencing a mental illness. Okay, that's a severe depression or anxiety, and those things have been on the rise, and that was just before COVID-19, so we're already at a critical point, and then you add all of that on. That's 1.5 million people over last year's data set in these measurements. Okay, so 1.5 million more people are talking about feeling depressed, anxious, or a whole host of other things, and that's before COVID. That's over and above 1.5 million people over and above over last year's data set. We have a 0.15% increase in suicidal ideation among adults. And the rate increases if you're between 18 and 25 years old. That's actually an 11% increase in suicidal thoughts over the last 30 days of when this was put together. And it's not just young adults being affected. Again, that's 0.15% of everybody. But yes, it hits that young adult sector hard. But there's another there's another sector that's been hit incredibly hard. And one of the most stressed people groups in America right now is under the age of 18. And they're feeling it. And what's odd is never before in history have we had so few coping mechanisms for people of that age. Typically, the coping mechanism is family togetherness and cohesion and relationships, and that helps soften the blow, and you can be a part of a loving family system, but the family system has all but dissolved over the last couple decades. This is the state we find ourselves in. This is an incredibly dark time, and I don't know about you, but I feel it. It's hard. So while things may have been good for me and my family over this last year, we feel the reality of where things have been societally and politically. So my question is, in a time when it's dark, in a time when it seems like maybe God is just absent, in a time where we feel like we can't control anything at all, what do we do? How do we respond? How do we as a people of God respond in the midst of what seems like hopelessness, where possibly the whole world is in this kind of a dark night of the soul? What do we do, and how do we go forward? I want to invite you to turn to Malachi chapter 4. Malachi chapter 4 is an interesting chapter of the Bible for a number of different reasons. Malachi being one of the last prophets in Israel, or at least among the last prophets in Israel, and believed to be one of the last writers of what we have as the authoritative Old Testament. So what we are reading are the last words of one of the last prophets in Israel before the New Testament. Now, Israel finds itself in exile. They've been under Persian rule for a while, and in the midst of all of that, there's been a number of compromises that have happened in the life and lifestyle living practices of Israel. And the compromise has been religiously, they've been influenced by other nations' deities and religious practices, and it's just kind of this downhill fall for Israel. But that's nothing new for Israel. They've been in this cycle again and again and again, and it's been the role of the prophet to come back in, and a role of a prophet was to represent God to people, being the mouthpiece of God, and call people back into right relationship with Yahweh. That is the law and the covenant and all of these relational agreements that God had with Israel and Israel had with God, and it was the job of the prophets to call people back into alignment with that covenant. And Malachi does that as well. So before Malachi 4, for the first 3 chapters, we have Malachi pointing out fault after fault after fault of Israel, and you begin to see why Israel killed so many of its prophets. Right? Like, I don't think there's ever been a time in history where we've liked people starting out a conversation with, "Let me tell you what you did wrong." I know I love it personally. Sarcasm. All right. So, chapter 4. Surely the day is coming. It will burn like a furnace. All the arrogant and evildoer will be stubble, and the day that is coming will set them on fire, says the Lord Almighty. Not a root or a branch will be left to them. But for you who revere my name, the Sun of Righteousness will rise with healing in its rays, and you will go out and frolic like well-fed calves. Then you will trample on the wicked. They will be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day when I act, says the Lord Almighty. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and the laws I gave him at Horeb for all Israel. See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the great and dreadful day the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. So what we have Malachi doing here is we have a couple of different things. He's giving kind of 2 bookends to what will happen because of Israel's disobedience. He has 2 bookends. He has a prophecy of destruction, and then he has a prophecy of hope. And then he has some directions and some explanations to fill in the gaps between those 2 bookends. So we're going to walk through those bookends really quick. And the first one is the amazing prophecy of destruction, right? A really hopeful message. And Malachi says, surely the day is coming. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to try to figure it out. You just have to know the day is coming, Malachi says, when all the arrogant, every evildoer will be like stubble, and it will be set on fire, and nothing will be left. So Malachi says there is a day coming, most assuredly coming, when everything that is apart from God will be destroyed. There is going to be an intense destruction. Now, the prophets oftentimes used imagery because the people are not actually stubble, right? They're not actually being burned. Historically, we find out that there was actually a great amount of destruction happening that progressively increased over the next 500 years, resulting in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, when Rome decided to come through and just stamp out any last hope that Judaism had. So Jerusalem was kind of the capital city, and it was the center of worship. worship. It was the place where Yahweh's presence resided. And eventually, over time, it just intensifies. The destruction, the judgment intensifies until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, just completely razed to the ground. And Malachi is giving them a warning about this. That over the next 400 to 500 years, there's going to be incredible destruction. It is going to be an incredibly dark time. It is going to be an incredibly difficult time, and it's going to be as if everything is stubble and the fire just sweeps through. You guys understand that, right? You know what that's like. Everything is stubble and the fire just burns through. Not even a root or a branch will be left. What Malachi is doing is he's giving them a picture of their immediate future, and we see it play out again over the next 400 to 500 years. Then he continues on to the other bookend. Right after the prophecy of destruction, we have a prophecy of hope. But for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its rays, and you will go out and frolic like well-fed calves. So after this season of destruction, after the season of darkness where it feels like God is completely absent or at best only active in destruction, there will come a day after a long night where it seems like there's a new day dawning. It seems like this sun is rising and there will be healing in its rays. Maybe your version, your translation of your Bible says healing in its wings. And that's simply because of the picture that was oftentimes made out of a sun, where the sun was a representation of divinity. And oftentimes the sun would be depicted with its rays coming out as wings. And so this word rays and wings, they really mean the same thing, but the effect is also the same. The purpose of this sun, the imagery of this sun, is one of healing. It's one of restoration. It's one of, you know what, there was a long, dark winter. It's like in Michigan when the Labor Day would come, oftentimes it was like somebody switched a light switch off on the sun, and it just went away behind clouds until almost Memorial Day, until spring. And then somebody would flip the light switch back on and the sun would come back out. And let me tell you what, when that happens, you throw on your shorts, you put on a t-shirt. It does not matter if it's only 35 degrees out. When that sun comes out, you go sit in it because it will feel incredible. And it feels like it's this healing presence. It feels like winter was never going to go, but now it's gone and spring is here. And that's the idea that Malachi is putting forward. He's saying there's going to be this long, dark night. And it is going to make you long for hope. It is going to make you long for restoration and healing. And when that sun comes up, when the Son of Righteousness emerges, it will be a healing and a welcomed presence. So Malachi prophesies hope with this imagery of the sun and its rays coming up with healing. And have you ever seen cows on a nice spring day after they're well fed and they're just like, we would drive by the dairies that were around us, and you would just see these calves or even baby horses just like sprinting or galloping through the fields, and it was incredible. And you didn't get to see it super often, but when you did, it was memorable because it was just this joyful experience. That's what it's like. That's the picture that Malachi gives us when the hope of the Messiah comes. So he gives these two bookends. He says, Malachi says there's going to be destruction, and then at the other end of things, there's going to be healing and there's going to be hope. At the beginning, it's going to seem like God is absent, but at the end, God is going to heal. And then he says this, verse 4. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and laws I gave him at Horeb for all of Israel. So he's bookended this for us, and then he starts to fill in the pieces. So we have darkness and we have hope, and there's going to be a long, dark span in between it, and he gives Israel something to do in the meantime. And I would think a number of things is happening here with Malachi, but I think one of them is he realizes he will be the last voice for almost 400 years representing God to people. Because after Malachi, we have something that happens, And it's called, in biblical studies, it's called the intertestamental period. It's also referred to as 400 years of silence, and still some other people refer to it as the white pages between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Right? That's 400 years where God did not speak. And I think Malachi realizes his role is one of the last people that would speak on behalf of God to Israel, and he needs to remind them of something. So he points all the way back, hundreds and hundreds of years back, to when Moses and Israel received instruction from Yahweh on Mount Zion, here referred to as Horeb, because sometimes they would refer to geography in two different ways, especially over time and over history. And he says, remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and laws I gave him at Horeb for all Israel. And I wonder, why does he say that? He says it because Israel in the darkness is going to need something to hold on to. When things are dark and when things are hopeless, when God isn't speaking and it feels like God is absent, we have to hold on to something. And so Malachi points back to the laws and the prophets and the promises of God and says, when it seems like God is distant, hold on to the promises that he's already given. Hold on to those pieces of himself that he has already revealed, because you will most absolutely need them. Our tendency in dark seasons and destructive seasons is to just start to wander and to become hopeless and have no direction or no kind of North Star, no sense of what is happening. And Malachi sees that's going to happen for Israel, and he says, hold on to the law that was given to Moses. This is the way God has revealed himself. This is who he is. Tell the stories of his rescue. You see, one of the main things about the law was not just the do's and the don'ts. One of the main things of the law was what it represented. And the law represented the rescue and deliverance by God for Israel out of Egypt. And so when Malachi points all the way back to Moses, he says, remember your deliverance and who you should be in light of that deliverance. Remember that deliverance and all of the stories we tell our kids and our grandkids and their kids about who Yahweh is and what he's done for us. And that's what Malachi does here. He says, remember this in this dark season. Don't lose sight of who God is. Don't lose sight of who you are. Hold on to the law. And then he continues on, see, I will send the prophet Elijah before you, to you before the great and dreadful day the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. So we have the beginning destruction. We have the bookend of hope. We have the instructions of what we do in the meantime, and then we have a marker for when things are going to start to happen, when the spring is beginning and the winter thaw is about to set in, and it's this Elijah. Now, for a lot of Jews, they actually expected God to send Elijah, the one that walked on earth before. They expected him to be sent again, and they were waiting for that. But we know from the words of Jesus that this Elijah it characterized a person. It characterized their ministry. It characterized the spirit that they carried. And it was in the person of John the Baptist, the one who cried out, a voice in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord and make straight the paths for our God. So Malachi points all the way forward to the person of John the Baptist coming and says, when you see him, this is the moment that the Son of Righteousness is about to rise. This is the moment where your healing is about to happen. Until then, hold on to who God is. Malachi gives them all the warning and all the heads up that they need, and then he's done. He's just done. That's the end of it. For 400 years, they don't hear from the Lord. For 400 years, God seems absent, but Malachi foresaw that, and he has a little bit of an encouragement for Israel. It's like he's saying, when God seems absent, he's really working behind the scenes for your healing. When God seems absent, he's actually working behind the scenes for your healing. He's preparing for it. He's putting the pieces together, and it may take 400 years, and it may seem like the only thing that's happening is destruction, but hold on to the revelation of God because you're going to need it in order to get through. Because God is never absent. He just works differently. He is putting together the pieces, and so we see over the next 400 years that while God was absent, history was anything but silent. While nobody heard God's voice, so much was going on behind the scenes that led to the healing of the people of Israel and then the entire world. So first we have Persia in rule over Israel, and they had been at the time of Malachi and even afterward. And during that time, Jews were allowed to observe their own rituals. They were allowed to observe their own religious practices and even rebuild their temple. But there was this compromising that was setting in. After Persia, Alexander the Great comes out of Greece. And he defeats Darius of Persia, and he continues some of the things, but then, he restricts a couple of the other things. And we see the beginning of this real downward slope in the life of Israel. So while, again, they were allowed to have their religious practices and their freedoms, what Alexander the Great brought is he brought a preeminence of Greek lifestyle and thought, which was all about our pleasure, which was all about the internal world void of any sense of Yahweh. So yes, Israel could worship how they wanted to worship, but they were expected to live like a Greek. It was almost as if Alexander the Great came along and said, you can worship any way you want to, but it shouldn't affect your everyday reality. What should affect your everyday reality is who's in power now, and it is not your God. You can sacrifice to him all you want, but Greece rules. After that, we have Antiochus Epiphanes takes over in 167 BC, and he takes things a step further. So Alexander the Great allowed religious freedom, but Antiochus Epiphanes does not allow religious freedom. In fact, he takes it entirely in the opposite direction, not just looking to take shots at their lifestyle. He removes the priestly order of Aaron in Israel and sets in place priests who would be loyal politically to him. He takes out the altar that God had given directions to sacrifice on, and he puts his own pagan altar in there and only offers unclean animals as a slap in the face to Israel and as a testament to the fact that they have defeated Israel's God. This was one of the darkest turns of those 400 years of silence. And it's one of the reasons that Malachi says, hold on to the law that Moses gave you. You're going to need it. You're going to need to remember that you have a God who delivers, because it is dark. After Antiochus Epiphanes, we have Pompey the Great, who comes out of Rome in 63 BC, and he conquers most of the known world. He was an incredible military genius, and he conquers most of the known world in the name of Rome, sets up this Greco-Roman society, and he establishes the rule of the Caesars. We have Julius Caesar, we have Augustus Caesar, and the line goes on and on and on, and it's what connects us to the story of Jesus. There's a Caesar in rule at the time of Jesus. There's a Caesar in rule at the time of the one who, with the voice calling out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. These are the major checkpoints along those 400 years that it seemed like God was absent. But in reality, he was working through all of this. You see, nothing is wasted with God, and everything is redeemed with God. Nothing is useless. He uses everything, every bit of history, every experience, every sacrifice, every hardship. God uses those things. And it's like he's weaving together the story of history to make a way for the healing presence of the Messiah. Without the events of those 400 years of silence, we would not be in the place for the world to receive the Messiah. Things had to be just right. People had to be in place. Lineages had to be worked out so that the person of Jesus could arrive. Friends, when it seems like God is absent, he is simply preparing behind the scenes for our healing, the healing of Jesus in our lives to us. It's been a dark year. It has been a very dark year. It's been more than a dark year. It seems like we've been in a season of silence. It seems like things just don't get better, and just when we think they're going to get better, that hope just gets deferred again and again. And we think maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel, maybe something will fix this, and then it just gets pushed back. We get another 3 weeks added on, or we get another month added on, and things are hard. And we're taking the hits. We are not right. We are not okay. Some of us have felt that. Some of us maybe are even in what is actually a dark night of the soul. This place emotionally where it feels like depression. We feel like we're alone, and we feel like everything has just gone dark. We don't feel God, we don't hear God, we don't sense God. He seems absent. St. John of the Cross was a late 1500s Catholic priest and writer. He wrote a book called The Dark Night of the Soul, and he says this: "There is another reason also why the soul has traveled safely in this obscurity. It has suffered, for the way of suffering is safer and also more profitable than that of rejoicing and of action. In suffering, God gives strength. But in action and in joy, the soul does but show its own weakness and imperfections. And in suffering, the soul practices and acquires virtue and becomes pure, wiser, and more cautious." For some of us, we've been going through this dark night of the soul. I think it's safe to say that our whole system, our whole society, in some ways, in a dark night of the soul. Now, everybody who has come out of this season of life has unanimously said the same thing. That while it felt like death, while it felt like God was absent, coming out of it, I have never felt closer to God. I have never seen God work more. Or in St. John's words, there is a refining, there is a growth that happens in that darkness. There is a growth that happens in the suffering. And again, in his word, it's about acquiring virtue. It's about being purified, becoming wiser and more cautious. God always works these moments of silence for our good. The hope of Jesus is no matter how dark things get, he always redeems them, he always changes them, and he always heals them. If that's you today, and not just us together, but maybe if that's you today, maybe the darkness, the dark season has been you praying for a son or a daughter for years, and you're just not sure how it's going to work out. Maybe you've been praying for a parent, a mom or a dad, and you're just not sure how it's going to work out. God hasn't been answering your prayers. Maybe you've been waiting for the Son of Righteousness to come with healing in his rays, and you've been waiting for that healing in your own body or in your own mind or in your own spirit or your own heart. And it's just not coming. I want to encourage you to hang on. I want to encourage you that God is not absent in those moments. He is working behind the scenes for your healing. God is not absent. He is working and preparing for our healing. The hope of Jesus will not be delayed forever, but he will come when the time is right. He will heal when the time is right. And in the meantime, he is still with us, though we don't feel it the same way. One of the names for Jesus is Emmanuel. It means God with us. And there's something beautiful about God, that even when he seems like he's just not active, he is always with us. He is the God who suffers. As one who has suffered, he can be with us in our suffering. As one who has felt the silence of the Father as he hung on the cross and he felt forsaken, he knows what it's like to suffer with us in the silence where our prayers don't seem to be answered and the waiting seems long. We have a God that is always with us and asks us to be with one another. And so here's my promise. Here's my promise to you. That if you find yourself in the season of waiting, or you find yourself in this season of contending for healing, or you find yourself in this struggle where it just seems like the hope just keeps getting deferred and deferred and deferred, I want to promise you something, that we will wait with you. And we will pray with you. And we will listen on your behalf. You do not wait and you do not suffer alone. This is the family of God. We will be with you because our God is with us. And God has always worked through his people to bring his kingdom on the earth. He has always worked through his people to bring his hope and healing on earth. And so our commitment, my commitment to you, is to be with you in that healing, in that waiting, in that silence, and in that struggle for as long as it takes. Now, one of the hard parts about being with people who suffer is it seems like the best thing is just to tell them what will make them better, right? I've heard it time and time again that when somebody is feeling low, oftentimes the best things Christians have to offer is platitudes. And I think that's been characteristically true for me at times, and I'm sure maybe you've received it or maybe you've been the one giving it before. But what I want to invite us into as we have a world that is in a dark season is I want to invite you also to be people of silence. I think one of the best things that we can practice together as a family and as the people of God is the practice that goes back for centuries, and it's the classic spiritual discipline of silence. Now, silence is not taking a vow not to speak for a day or a week or a month. The practice of silence is actually knowing when to speak and knowing when not to speak. It's out of silence saying the right thing at the right time. In fact, Richard Foster says even more about it. Richard Foster is an author, he's a pastor, and he's just like he is the guru for spiritual disciplines. He says this: silence frees us from the need to control others. Right? That need to control, even in our good things. If I could just say this thing, then you would feel better. Right? If you could just see my perspective, then you would be snapping out of this funk or this whatever. And he says, no, silence frees us from the need to control others. One reason we can hardly bear to remain silent is that it makes us feel so helpless. We are accustomed to relying upon words to manage and control others. A frantic stream of words flows from us in an attempt to straighten others out. We want so desperately for them to agree with us, to see things our way. We evaluate people, we judge people, and we condemn people. We devour people with our words, and silence is one of the deepest disciplines of the Spirit simply because it puts a stopper on that. When we become quiet enough, we let go of people, and we learn compassion for them. I'm inviting you to learn the discipline of silence because in a world of darkness, in a world of suffering, what people do not need right now is our controlling words, as if we could control anything. What they need right now is a compassionate people that can listen and can learn and can pray quietly by their side, contending for their healing. That is our commitment to you. That is my commitment to you. But that also needs to be our commitment to the world. Not to be people who go out and try to change things all the time, but can simply learn to be. Can simply learn how to have compassion for others, not to control or to change, but just be. I think the presence of somebody who has learned how to be silent and compassionate with others is one of the most healing things we can experience. Have you ever been with somebody who just sits with you that way? You have this sense that they just know. You don't have to talk, they just know, they get where you're at, and it's going to be okay because now somebody is actually with you. Not to change things, not to make you feel better, not to cheer you up, just to be with you. We can be that people. We can be that presence in the world, in a polarized and a dark world. We can be just that continuous, silent presence. Let's pray.